Hello and welcome to this very special podcast episode where I'm joined by a lady who happens to be a clinical psychologist, but that's not it. She is a TEDx speaker, an acclaimed author on issues pertaining to psychology of our favorite superheroes. She is the recipient of Eleanor Roosevelt Humanitarian Award by the United Nations. She recently appeared on Empower series, Empower, which is a series by Disney Plus that showcases our favorite Marvel superheroes and supervillains. And Dr. Janina Scarlet was featured on the episode of WandaVision, where she talked about Wanda Maximoff, aka the Scarlet Witch. She has been able to achieve all of this, what we might call it her present state. But her beginnings are even more interesting. They seem like straight out of the pages of a comic book. She is a survivor of radiation accident, a major radiation accident that happened in the world. And I'm talking about the real world now, not the Marvel or DC universe. She is a survivor of Chernobyl. She was exposed to the radiation that came out of that accident. And later on, she ended up as an immigrant in the United States, and she faced tremendous amount of challenges because of being of a different ethnicity, having a different accent. She faced a lot of troubles when she was at school. But lo and behold, it was one superhero movie that completely changed the course of her life. And that movie was the 2000 X-Men. So, without taking more of your time, viewers and listeners of Superheroes of Arabia podcast, I present to you Dr. Janina Scarlet, founder of superherotherapy.com. Thank you, Dr. Janina.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for such a warm welcome. That's very kind of you. Thank you for having me.
It's the least I can do on behalf of my community because the Arabian superhero fandom up until recently wasn't well known throughout the world. Fortunately, a lot of positive developments have taken place, and it's something like we are not embarrassed anymore to talk about our love for superheroes, to talk about our love for comics, action figures, and the movies and all that. And it's quite important because what you have been able to do, unlike many other clinical psychologists that are out there, that you were able to discover through your own experience the connection between the psyche of a superhero and a supervillain and our real life situations. So I want to ask you, what motivates you basically to focus on superheroes when you're trying to help out people in the real world?
Thank you. Great question. Well, like many people out there, I was raised to think that if we're struggling with depression, anxiety, or trauma, we need to just be strong and put it away and not think about it. And of course, these are old and outdated messages that actually don't serve us. And for many years, as a child, as a teenager, growing up, I was very ashamed about feeling depressed, about going through anxiety, about going through PTSD symptoms, but I didn't even know what those were.
Right.
But when I watched that first X-Men movie, I realized that we can talk about our mental health experiences through superheroes. And that if it's okay for superheroes to have anxiety and depression and trauma and go through loneliness, then it's okay for us human beings to do that too. And so I realized that for many folks who don't know how to communicate about their mental health, talking about fictional characters, especially superheroes, can take away the stigma about mental health, can give us hope for healing, and can even empower us to use our own stories and experiences to help other people in our community who are at the very beginning of that journey themselves.
interesting that you shared some of the insights of from your patients who you came across, and they saw some kind of an inspiration, some kind of a relevance with superheroes. Usually people dismiss superheroes as being cartoonish because they appear in the form of comic book art, they appear in the form of animation. But as a clinical psychologist, you have seen and experienced both worlds. Are superheroes more real than many believe them to be?
Absolutely. And I think especially in the last 30 or 40 years, we've seen many more superheroes and other fictional characters depicted as much more realistic. I think more and more writers and artists are depicting characters to be very similar to what we experience as readers and as viewers in terms of going through these kind of experiences of loss or trauma or anxiety. For example, there are superheroes now who have panic attacks. You know, like in the DC universe, for example, one of the Green Lanterns struggles with anxiety, right? And there's so many characters in the Marvel universe that for almost 50 or 60 years now have been depicted, right, as going through trauma. And I think that people who think that superheroes are either just for kids or don't have any clinical applications maybe don't know enough about superheroes. Because when we read comic books like the X-Men, for example, when we read, let's say, one of my favorite superheroes of all time is Storm. When we read Storm's story, we see that she struggles with tremendous anxiety when she is in tight and enclosed spaces. She struggles from something called claustrophobia, which is a
Yes.
fear of tight spaces, because of her traumatic origin story. And I argue that she still has unresolved PTSD, but that's besides the point.
Okay.
Um, but my point is, I think reading about these characters in comic books or seeing them in movies or television shows allows the readers and viewers to understand, oh, I'm not alone in this, and might even allow them to recognize, wait a minute, I've been through this too, or might even encourage them to talk to their friends or family members saying, oh, you know that thing that this character is going through, I've been through it too. I've had individuals who have just returned from maybe war zones, and they would tell me, you know how I felt when I was in this terrible situation? I felt like little Bruce Wayne felt, Batman, when he witnessed his parents being killed, and this was so much more meaningful for them to use a metaphor to describe the intensity that they felt about their loss and also how helpless they felt to be able to stop it than if they were to just try to name an emotion they felt. Because I don't think there's a word in any language to describe the anguish and the horror that we go through when we witness that kind of trauma, but to point to a character that people can relate to can allow us to not just express what we're going through, it allows us to feel understood and less alone. And that's how healing happens.
As a clinical psychologist and having talked about a lot of characters, having studied a lot of characters, and dealing with a lot of patients, is there a subtle message, underlying message in the world of superheroes, whether we're talking about comics, animations, or movies, that uh, you need to have some kind of a trauma or a disorder in order to do something great in life, or
Mm.
to do something very evil?
I can see how some people might think that, but that's not what I see. What I see is that the way that superheroes are written now allows people to see that, first of all, for most of us human beings, trauma is unfortunately a part of everyday life.
Right.
So many of us, when we go through life, experience a horrendous loss or something traumatic. Not every one of us will develop PTSD just because we go through trauma, but we all go through something traumatic. And I think that the beauty of these stories is that they allow us to remember that going through something painful is not a failure, it is not a character flaw, and that we're all in this together, because I find that it's not the details of the trauma or the loss or anxiety that cause a lot of struggle. It's the presence or the absence of support. And when we're able to have enough support from our community, when we're able to feel seen and heard and valued and understood, that's when recovery is most likely to happen. And I think when we're able to see a reflection of our experience in a comic book, that can be a big part of that healing experience, to know that somebody out there understands enough to write a character about it, and there are readers who are reading it who also understand. And that creates that message of I'm not alone.
And I truly understand your point, because the feeling of loneliness is probably the worst feeling a
Yes,
human being can ever experience. And I'm
yes,
really glad that you mentioned that uh, a lot of people, when they experience trauma or uh, any unfortunate event that causes them to be mentally damaged, they end up thinking of themselves as failures. And most of us are not blessed with the kind of support system around us.
yeah,
Would it be fair to say that comics tend to fill in that vacuum, or superheroes?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I think that many fictional characters in general, not only traditional superheroes, but even fantasy characters, science fiction characters, etc., can serve as what's called social surrogates. So, a surrogate friend, support group, or a mentor. I've had many people tell me, hey, for me, whether it was Princess Leia or Dumbledore or Charles Xavier, served as a mentor, a parental figure when I was going through a hard time. And I love those stories, and I bring them into treatment for my clients. So I encourage my clients to do an exercise called journaling in two parts, where I ask them to split the page in half. And on one side, I ask them to write out something that they're maybe struggling with that particular day. And on the other side, I ask them to write a message from their mentor, let's say from Charles Xavier, for example,
Right.
about what that mentor would say to them about this particular struggle. How would this mentor encourage and inspire them? And it creates an experience of self-compassionate practice. And it allows people also to think of solutions that they otherwise would not have thought of from a very compassionate perspective.
Understood. Dr. Janina, I'd like to take you to a journey of time travel.
Okay.
So there's this 11, 12-year-old girl from Ukraine who has survived a horrific accident in the former Chernobyl. And with all of the trauma and the challenges that you are facing at school, in a new society because you've emigrated to the United States, the cultural difference, the societal difference between Ukraine and the US, and you come across the X-Men movie. And you have also mentioned one of your favorite characters being Storm.
Yes.
Was that the first time the little Janina Scarlet came across superheroes, or did it happen before?
So, great question. So, I knew about superheroes from, roughly when I came to United States. I knew a little bit about Batman and Superman and Wonder Woman, mostly DC side. Um, I didn't fully I didn't enter the superhero world at that point. I didn't know much about superheroes. I just kind of knew that they were sort of fictional characters with superpowers. Um, and I don't know why, but I think it just didn't enter my purview. But when I saw the X-Men movie, I was 16 at that point, and
Ah,
it blew me away. And I wish the 12-year-old of me saw it at that point. But it immediately allowed me to feel less alone, For me, because of the way that Chernobyl affected my health to this day, still forever, um, when the weather changes, that's when my symptoms get a lot worse. And so for many years, I thought that I was controlled by the weather because I would feel very, very sick when the weather would change. But seeing Storm on the screen, being able to control the weather, it just woke up something in me. And I rethought my origin story. And I thought, maybe I'm not a victim. Maybe I'm a survivor. And I started thinking maybe I have this beautiful connection with the earth, with the weather, the way that Storm does. Maybe I feel when the earth cries, and that's why I feel sick or sad when it's raining. And so it didn't change my health and my pain levels, but it allowed me to feel less victimized by it. And then seeing the X-Men band together and support each other, even though their origins were different, their
Right.
traumas were different, their superpowers were different, but seeing them come together and help each other allowed me to realize that each and every person in that movie theater also felt alone,
Yes.
even though our origin stories were different. And so it inspired me to then sign up for psychology because I said, this is what I want to do. I want to use stories to help people feel less alone. And I never looked back.
I'm really grateful that you shared a very inspiring story about yourself. And along with the community, I just want to wish you that may the Almighty bless you with full recovery from all the after effects that have come out of that very horrific accident in human history. Okay, what happens the day after?
The day
Meaning
after the
that
movie.
when, yeah, the teenage Janina,
Yeah.
she says, okay, I'm gonna take up psychology. She realizes that she's not alone because she saw her own reflection in Storm and the rest of the X-Men. So now there are two types of journeys. One is the academic journey where you are now
Yes.
pursuing, you're taking up classes and stuff. And the other
Yes.
journey is, did you start reading comics or did you start just watching animated series? Because at that time, the Marvel animation and DC animation was pretty much
Uh,
at its peak, let's say. Or you got more indulged into the soon to be released DC and Marvel films. So tell us something about it.
Great question. So I think I'm one of those people that needs to do one thing at a time. So I think I dove into classes first. And
Right.
after grad school, I was like, okay, something's missing. I understand things from the logical point of view, but now I want to understand more, from this other side. And so I would read comic books here and there. So through high school and university, I was reading, mostly DC. I was reading some Batman stuff but it was really after grad school that I was like, okay, but I really want to get back to my roots and read the X-Men. And then, so I started reading about Storm and I started reading these other stories and I got into Sandman. That changed my life.
Okay, Neil
I'm
Gaiman's
actually
friend.
rereading it now again because it's so good.
Amazing,
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, yeah, amazing. And so just seeing all of these different elements really come together. And now I was an adult and I've taken all of these classes, including neuroscience, so understanding how the brain works, and then seeing these stories, it allowed me to appreciate them on such a deep level.
Beautiful. So would you define yourself as more of a superhero fan who reads comics or superhero fan who is into all mediums of heroism?
Probably more the latter. I like all mediums, I love comic books, but I also love movies and TV shows. TV shows and comic books are probably my favorite. I do really like to read, and with TV shows, I like being able to see the progression of the characters, So I'm so excited, like, with like the new X-Men animated series, coming back like X-Men 97 and all these other things too. And then of course, all of the Marvel stuff, other Marvel stuff like live action, like WandaVision, is probably one of my favorite TV shows of all time.
WandaVision is your all-time favorite TV show of all time. Okay.
Yes.
That I'm going to be picking something on that part
Okay.
also. But before I go towards that, may I ask, like, if you have to pick a patient from the DC universe, Marvel universe, and it doesn't have to be specific, like from the comic book version or the animation or the movie version.
Yeah.
Who is the character? And he or she can be on the good side or the bad side
Yeah.
or the anti-hero route.
Yeah.
Who would be the character whom you would like to treat as a
Mm,
clinical psychologist?
so good. I feel like this particular character wouldn't really need my help, but I would love to work with him. I'd love to work with the Hulk. Um,
A lot of
um,
people are gonna love that answer.
yep. I think the Hulk is so endearing. Um, Batgirl, on the DC side, Barbara's been through it. I would definitely want to help her when she's going through trauma and her process of becoming the Oracle. And then Wanda, the Scarlet Witch, I would so love to work with her. And, my heart just breaks for Wanda because she lost everything and everyone. And I
Yes.
feel like she deserved more help than she got. So I would love to just like spend a month with her on a daily basis, just reminding her that her feelings matter and she matters and supporting her in her grief and trauma journey.
I'm really glad that you shared your list of preferable cases that you would deal with, because uh, having seen you in Empower talk about Wanda, I specifically took out House of M from my collection. Why did I bring it out is because I've read a lot of crossovers, and they are some of them are well written,
Yeah.
emotionally. Like for example, back in 1993, there was the Fatal Attractions crossover, and the intense rivalry between Professor Xavier and Magneto just blew me away. But if I have to tell someone that is there a crossover event that shook me from within, it was House of M. It was Wanda Maximoff, Scarlet Witch, and seeing her pain in a way that may had not been explored before. Of course, Steve Englehart did a marvelous job in the late 70s. So the comic books, do they offer a better insight into the psyche of our characters? Because you loved WandaVision, and I love that live action series also, because it's from the recent list of flops. WandaVision has been the best that came out of it. But if I compare WandaVision with House of M crossover event, would it be fair for me to say that to understand Wanda's pain, I have to read the House of M?
I think it depends on each individual person. I think for some people, we might understand somebody from a specific standpoint if we have certain elements of their story. And for some people, format matters too. For some folks, reading graphic novels and seeing the facial expressions where we can spend time on each panel really makes a difference. For other folks, watching television shows allows them to really feel like they're a part of the action, and especially if people have seen the Avengers movies and have seen Wanda's story progress and then pick up again after Endgame in WandaVision, then I think it makes sense. And so honestly, I think the beauty of having all these different formats is that folks can pick and choose what resonates with them, what they relate to, and what elements of storytelling really make sense to them. And I've had people, bring in comic books from like the 80s or the 90s, that are all torn and that mean the world to them,
Yes.
and then I had folks that tell me like, hey, they just watched a movie that just came out or a TV show that came out last month and it meant everything to them. And so I don't even think it's the format or even the specific story as much as it is about whatever resonates for that particular person.
Understood. Understood. Now, while I was doing research, because I have had some deep amount of exposure when it came to mental health, when it came to things like
Yeah.
depression and anxiety. So, and when I realized, because when you are kids, we just see our superheroes in a and supervillains in a different way. But as I grew older and I started to learn and watch and understand more about the superheroes and the supervillains, I realized that these are real life psychological cases. I mean, Moon Knight, for example, when I was a
Yeah.
kid, I used to think
Yeah.
that how can a guy be having be one person and then be
Yeah.
a totally other disconnected personality.
Yeah.
So I have a doctor friend of mine, my childhood friend. He has studied psychology. So he said,
Yeah.
well, the case with the maximum multiple personality disorders was diagnosed in England. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it was like 12 different multiple personalities existing
Mhm.
within one individual. And that just blew me away
Yeah.
significantly. When we look at Wanda, and while I was doing my research, I realized that she is a case of psychic break or psychotic break, the mental
So
condition
great
that's
question. Yeah, great question. So, you know, um, what used to be called multiple personality disorder is now referred to as dissociative identity disorder, right? And Moon Knight shows a fictionalized example of somebody having separate split identities that, don't know each other, are not aware of each other. And for some individuals, it does exist. For the only thing is that I wish Moon Knight was depicted as not having, also a killer personality, because unfortunately, a lot of people with mental health disorders, including DID, dissociative identity disorder, are villainized
are
in comic books. Whereas, a lot of folks who have mental health disorders are not actually violent. But what I saw in Wanda is an example of severe dissociation that happens in some survivors of severe trauma. All of us dissociate to some level. Dissociation just means disconnection from the present moment. Sometimes we might either be driving or walking somewhere and we might completely check out and think about something else and not remember how we got there. So that's kind of a really mild, benign example. But for those of us who've been through severe trauma, like Wanda, in this case, we might completely check out for a period of time. So for some trauma survivors, it could be for 15 minutes or an hour or a day. And for some folks, it might be for an extended period of time where they might not remember certain things. They might not remember that a loved one passed away. They might, and that's why some trauma survivors might not remember details of their trauma until many years later. There are some folks, for example, I've seen who are adults who might all of a sudden remember an example of severe child abuse that they went through maybe 30 years prior.
right.
And so to me, in watching WandaVision, it seems like it probably goes through severe complex PTSD, I think, maybe. I haven't interviewed her. But with, I think, a big dissociation episode, where she, because of her witching powers and her abilities, her dissociation became a reality. And then she, created this town where she could have a family. And it's so heartbreaking. It is so heartbreaking just when she realizes that it's actually not true.
That was a very tragic scene when she puts her children in bed and she says final goodbye, and you can see the realization that's coming in. And I just like went back into the pages of House of M, because when she like Doctor Strange makes her realize that what she has done and the kind of damage that's there. I would like to ask you a question concerning the men's mental health month. I recently came across that June happens to be the men's mental health month. As someone who has been a practicing clinical psychologist who takes the the superheroic approach to treat her patients, is it something that needs to be talked about more compared to, let's say, our female counterparts? What has been your experience?
I think we need to talk about everyone's mental health. I think that historically speaking, people were, well, everyone was given really unhelpful messages. For example, men were often told that they're not allowed to feel sad,
Right.
or that they're not allowed to feel depressed or anxious. And that creates not only loneliness that can worsen people's mental health rates, and also can potentially sometimes spike suicidal thoughts or behaviors. For women, women are often taught that they're not allowed to feel angry. And the truth is, all emotions are important. Emotions are information, and they allow us to know where our unmet needs are. And so, for many men, for example, who are struggling with depression and anxiety, if they have been socialized or told that they're not allowed to talk about feelings and that they need to, quote unquote, suck it up and push feelings away, it it creates this stigma that is not only unhelpful, but again, perpetuates mental health. And so I think being able to talk about symptoms, to talk about the fact that everyone goes through a hard time, everyone goes through grief, everyone goes through depression and anxiety can be so helpful. And so seeing superheroes and other characters who are going through it and talking about it is really helpful. Heroes don't only include traditional superheroes, they also include, as I mentioned, fantasy and sci-fi characters.
True.
And I don't know if you're a fan of Star Wars. I'm a big fan of Star Wars. And for example, Star Wars Rebels is one of my favorite animated, or anything Star Wars really.
Right.
And Star Wars Rebels does a really good job of depicting men talking about grief and men talking about feelings in general. And I love that more and more superheroes are depicted as being okay to talk about these things, being okay to discuss feelings, because I think that it then will encourage other folks to do the same.
You said something really valuable, I might say, that emotions are important. What happens if these emotions are not expressed?
So I'll give you an example. This is a water bottle,
Right.
but let's imagine it's a soda bottle, with something like Coca-Cola,
Right.
right? You shake it up and you shake it up and you shake it up and you shake it up, but you keep a lid on it. That pressure has to go somewhere. And that's what happens with emotions. Emotions are energy. And I think that's why I love Storm so much, and the Scarlet Witch. They both use emotions for energy, right? To
Right.
use as their magic. And all of us human beings, right? We have this energy for a reason, right? And emotions are meant to be attended to. That's not to say that we need to just throw the lid off and, let all our emotions come out. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with having a big cry. That's actually very therapeutic. And
Right.
there is a reason why we feel better. But there's also another way, and that's to open the lid lightly every day
Right.
to let some of the pressure out. And so if we're able to make space for our emotions on a regular basis, and attend to them the way that we would attend to a child or a beloved pet, right? If we can learn to love our emotions, including the uncomfortable ones, because they're all information and they're all necessary, then I think that we can be much more adjusted human beings. And I think we can be more attuned not only to ourselves, but also to each other.
Since we are in the final moments or final minutes of our interview, uh, in your experience, because you have mentioned a lot of cases of superheroes from different mediums with different kinds of disorders or traumas and so forth, which superhero has endured the most trauma?
Hmm. Gosh, that's such a great question. No one ever asked me that question before. Good question. I don't know. I think that suffering is relative. I think that the ones that had to endure it alone have probably suffered the most because I don't think it's the event itself. It's when we have to go through it alone.
So,
That's when
you're
it's
a
really
clinical
hard.
psychologist, in your experience, top of your mind.
I mean, top of my mind just because of what we've been talking about. I think Wanda, because she had to go through so much alone, like
Right.
she didn't have the support of the Avengers, but I think it applies to so many others as well.
Well, we shouldn't blame the Avengers only. Her father also, Magneto.
That's true. That's
Okay.
true.
Uh, I would like to, before I inform my viewers and the listeners about how they can know more about your work, about your history with clinical psychology and the superherotherapy.com, I would like you to share a message, a final message, if you will, that will resonate with the superhero fans. As a clinical psychologist, what do you think that it's important for
Yeah.
them to know?
What I want to say is that if ever you looked up either to a superhero or another, either real life human or a fictional character, please know that there's also somebody out there that looks up to you. And they might never think to tell you this, but the truth is you're somebody's hero too. And there's probably somebody alive out there because of you, because of your kindness, your compassion, your empathy, and just know that each and every day you have the possibility to change somebody's life for the better just by being a kind and wonderful person. And chances are you already have. And so, to anyone watching or listening, I just wanted to say thank you for being wonderful and thank you for being a real life superhero already.
How can people get in touch with Dr. Janina Scarlet?
Thank you. I'm fairly easy to find on social media, so folks can look for me. So it's most social media, it's Dr. Dr. Janina Scarlet, or if you just Google me, I think you'll find me on just about every platform, and then my website as well. And thank you again so much for having me, and thank you for your wonderful podcast. Thank you so much for everything that you do.
On the contrary, we would like to thank you for taking out the time, sharing your experience, sharing your thoughts on a very valuable, very important topic, which many people either shy away from or are reluctant to do so. I hope that my viewers and my listeners find this podcast episode really helpful. To make things easy for my viewers and listeners, I am going to be placing all the links to Dr. Janina's social media, her official website. So it makes it easier for people to reach out to her, to read her works, and any other thing that she is going there with. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Janina. And I hope we get to meet soon to talk about something really interesting for a particular superhero who is very important from a clinical psychology perspective.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. My pleasure.